Discuss is about, before we really go into the food, I want to just briefly introduce you guys about cultural homogeneity. Now, homogeneity is when people have a similar culture and a similar origin and a similar history. And we see that in the country of Korea, both the North and the South, since they share a common language, a common ancestry, and a common history. And not so much in the United States, where we have more of a diversity. You know, in Korea, someone that is Korean is basically Korean. You know, we don't say, this person is of this origin, of that origin. You know, they recognize each other as Korean. But here in the United States, when we look at each other, we're all American, but we think about, I'm of Hispanic origin, I'm of, Asian origin, I'm from here, I'm from there. But if you look at Korea, there's still some diversity. It's in the food. Although we tend to think about the ancient world as, a place where kind of every country and every people was kind of isolated and secluded. Europe was way out there, and, China and Korea and Japan were just, out in the edges of the world. The reality was that people still came into contact with each other, and this is evident through Korea's cuisine, which has been around for a long time. It's the people and the country itself. For example, if you look at the Korean barbecue, it originates from Mongolian beef because the Mongol people were originally having their empire, which stretched from Poland to Korea. And a lot of people stayed in Korea after the Mongol Empire collapsed, which led to a Mongol heritage of the Korean people, and it's still evident today in the cuisine. Similarly, you have the kimbap, which is very similar to sushi, which also resembles how Japan and Korea have similarities, and also it shows how Japan had their occupation over the Korean peninsula. And also, kimchi itself is believed to have developed from Chinese methods of preserving vegetables, which also shows how China also had its empire over Korea, and how these three different cultures, the Mongol and the Japanese and the Chinese all came, together in Korea. And additionally, also the chili pepper, the gochu pepper, which we know is used in kimchi and other food, came from the Spanish Americas, which is very interesting because at the time, the Americas were just newly discovered, but somehow European traders were able to bring it here. And while, Asia, we tend to think of it as, secluded and very isolationist, and people struggled to do trade, somehow the chili pepper got in, and it became a major part of the diet. But I want to talk specifically about kimchi because I found it very interesting. It's, although considered as one dish, it is very diverse and comes from varied types, and it's reflective of Korea, the country and its people. As I said, a Korean, is a Korean, but, Korea is a large country and it has various different regions, provinces, and different people. Even though they're all one country, they come from different origins, and each region has its uniqueness. And one thing I wanted to talk about is that while we still have, if you remember from watching JSA, although we have, the North and the South, the Korean people think of each other as one. Likewise, if you look at kimchi, you can have, like a cucumber kimchi dish, and, like a ginseng dish, and, your traditional beichu kimchi, which is made of the cabbage. They're all kimchi, even though they're all different. And one thing I wanted to talk about kimchi was just that from North to South it's a little different, because in the North, it doesn't have as much spice or as much flavor because they didn't have as much ingredients due to the winter. Whereas in the South, where it's more sunnier, it was easier to obtain ingredients and spices, so it has more flavor. And I just wanted to show to you here, this is a map of Korea and its various different provinces. And this is not usually the map that we tend to think of. This is divided into various different regions and its provinces. And although it is one Korea, it's really several different parts. So it's interesting to think about that, but I really like that because it relates, in that sense, it's kind of almost like us, America, and the American people. We're all so different, but we identify as one. And while Korea may be more homogenous, they still have their differences with each other. And, seeing that in the map and seeing that, in their different kimchi dishes was something that's very interesting. And that, struck me as unique, as something I didn't really expect. Now, but when you think of kimchi, you don't really think about that. As I earlier mentioned, when you think about Korea, you think about north-south, or maybe just the whole peninsula itself. Likewise, with kimchi, we tend to think of this one kimchi dish, the cabbage dish, called Beiju kimchi. So I just wanted to just list you more briefly how it's prepared. You just grab a Napa cabbage, you rinse it, because cabbage at the time was more abundant as opposed to the meat and other foods that we're used to. When we think of the delicious meat dishes and all of that, that's stuff that people ate when they were prosperous. But cabbage, on the other hand, was more available for people. And when the Spanish introduced the chili pepper, it was easier to preserve in the clay jars, which they would dig. So they would grab the cabbage, and they would grab some more other vegetables like daikon and ginger and such, chop it up, and put it together. And they would have it fermented in the spices so that it would be able to preserve. And then they put it in the jars, let it ferment, and then bring it out and eat it. And it would last for up to like 3 weeks. And after that, they could still eat it, but in other recipes such as kimchi jjigae and other dishes. And then I just wanted to also say some things about you, that kimchi also has a tradition in Korea. Originally, it was kind of considered a female dish because in Korea, the role of the housewife was to have the house ready. Like when the man came from work and everything, she'd have food prepared, she'd have the meal, she'd take care of the home, take care of the kids. Kind of typical to here in the United States, where women, had the cult of domesticity, in which they too were expected to stay home and not, do work, but instead prepare the house and be, available for the family, for their husbands. So they were actually tested on their value as a wife was tested by how they prepared kimchi. But all of that was past, because now that you can buy store-bought kimchi and kimchi can be easily manufactured, it's no longer as imminent in the culture, but kimchi is still a very popular dish in Korea. And this right here is a bunch of kimchi jars in which they're put to ferment. Now those jars are depending, usually during the summer, if there's like a river nearby, they will put it into the river so that it could stay cool. Other times, like during the winter and such, so that it doesn't freeze and get really damaged, people would dig the jars. Other times they put it in caves. But the whole point was to not really get it exposed to like freezing temperatures where it would just get, go bad, but neither keep it out in the hot where it would also spoil. And now I wanted to connect this because kimchi is really, to me, it's kind of special. I have only tried the Beiju kimchi, which is, the typical kimchi we think of. But, likewise, there's salsa. Here, where we're more exposed to, the Mexican and Hispanic culture where salsa is very popular, we may know that there's more than one type of salsa. But in other parts of the world, when people think of, salsa itself, people think of just this red, tomatoey, maybe chili pepper sauce. But there's really various types. And in Mexico, as you see, there's a map right here in Mexico. It's not what we're traditionally used to. Just like the Korean map, it's actually divided into different states and different regions. And they're different people. The people from, along the northern border, norteños, as they're known, are different from people from the south, from el sur, around Yucatan. People in the middle towards the mountains are also different from people in the coast. And Mexico has a diverse history too. There's also come into contact with European cultures and, even African cultures and even, Asian cultures, towards the Pacific coast. We don't tend to think of that necessarily. We think of just, the sombrero and the one, homogenous image of just, one Mexico with the sarape and sombrero. And, and the one red salsa dish for those who don't know too much about the culture. But the reality is that there's millions of salsa dishes, and that really relates to me because it's so diverse, and we don't think of it that way. And it relates to our America because every time we think about the, diversity, what do we think of? America. Every other country, an Englishman is English, a Frenchman is French, and Korean is Korean, a Mexican's Mexican, but people can come from different origins. And not only that, today we see that because our world is modern. But in the past, that was still happening. Even though people were still isolationists and people were keeping to themselves and it was hard to get from one country to another, there was still contact between people, and the world was still global. Only that it was harder to get transportation done. And people still didn't have that deep understanding that we're starting to reach today. But people were always interested in one another, and have influenced one another. And on that note, that will conclude our presentation.
Okay.